A city pigeon is one of the few animals that can look overfed and homeless at the same time. It waddles through a subway entrance like it owns the building. It fights 6 other pigeons over half a French fry. It walks directly in front of people who could accidentally turn it into a stain, apparently trusting that human civilization has developed brakes specifically for pigeons. And then, after surviving all of that, it flies onto a statue of somebody historically important and poops on his head. There is a reason people call them rats with wings. We associate pigeons with sidewalks, garbage cans, train stations, dirty rooftops, stale bread, and that one guy in the park carrying a suspicious amount of birdseed. They do not look like food. They barely look like wildlife. They look like something the city forgot to clean up, which makes one detail about pigeons extremely awkward. Humans spent thousands of years deliberately raising them because we wanted to eat them, not during some famine, not because civilization had collapsed. We built houses for them. We bred them. We protected them. We collected their eggs, harvested their manure, selected the birds we liked, and served young pigeons as food across large parts of the ancient world. The animal did not suddenly become disgusting. We changed the category we put it in. And once you understand how that happened, the pigeon starts looking less like a dirty bird and more like a case study in one of the strangest things humans do with animals. Because humans do not simply decide which animals are edible by tasting them. We decide what an animal means first, and then we taste the meaning. Long before pigeons were stealing pizza crust in Manhattan, their ancestors were rock doves living on cliffs across Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia. Rock doves were unusually convenient neighbors. They nested in colonies. They returned reliably to the same roosts. They ate seeds and grain. They reproduced quickly. And unlike a deer, they did not require you to chase them through a forest with a spear. Give pigeons a protected place to nest, put that place near agriculture, and they more or less manage themselves. Humans noticed. Exactly when pigeon domestication began is difficult to pin down, partly because domestic pigeons and wild rock doves are so closely related. But people across the ancient Mediterranean and Middle East were keeping pigeons thousands of years ago, and they were not keeping them because the birds were cute. Pigeon houses were food infrastructure. In parts of the Middle East, large structures were built specifically to hold enormous numbers of birds. Farmers could collect squab, the young pigeons traditionally eaten before they fully mature, while also gathering pigeon manure. That manure mattered. Before synthetic fertilizer, concentrated bird droppings were valuable. They were rich in nutrients, useful in agriculture, and in some regions became an important product in their own right. So a pigeon colony could give you meat and fertilizer while feeding largely on material produced by the surrounding agricultural system. That is not a pest. That is livestock. The Romans raised pigeons. Medieval Europeans raised pigeons. Across North Africa and the Middle East, pigeon keeping became part of agricultural life. Dovecotes were built into estates, farms, towers, courtyards, and villages. And there is a detail here that exposes just how badly modern intuition can mislead us. In some historical European societies, the right to maintain large dovecotes could be associated with land ownership and status. Think about that for a second. Today, if hundreds of pigeons move onto your property, you call somebody to remove them. Historically, having hundreds of pigeons on your property could advertise wealth. Same bird. Completely different story. Young pigeon also developed its own culinary identity. Squab. Squab is tender because the bird is harvested young before the muscles develop the toughness associated with older birds. It appeared in refined cooking as well as ordinary household food, and pigeon was useful for something even stranger. Navigation. A pigeon raised in one location has a remarkable ability to return home over long distances. Humans turn that instinct into communication technology. For centuries, pigeons carried messages. Merchants used them. Military forces used them. News traveled by pigeon. During wartime, individual messenger pigeons even became famous for carrying information through dangerous conditions. So by the time modern cities arrived, humans had already assigned pigeons an almost ridiculous number of jobs: food, fertilizer producer, messenger, racing animal, status symbol, pet, religious symbol, and then somehow urban trash bird. That transformation did not happen because the pigeon changed. It happened because the human system around the pigeon changed. For most of history, producing meat was expensive. Animals required land, feed, time, labor, and storage. A household or community used whatever protein sources made sense in its local environment. But modern industrial food systems began doing something previous societies could not do nearly as efficiently. They made certain animals extremely cheap, and no animal benefited from that transformation more dramatically than the chicken. Modern meat chickens are the product of intense selective breeding combined with industrial farming systems designed around efficiency. They grow extraordinarily quickly. They convert feed into body mass efficiently. They can be raised in enormous numbers. Their processing can be standardized. Their meat can be chilled, frozen, packaged, shipped, breaded, fried, shredded, canned, and sold almost anywhere. Once chicken became cheap enough, reliable enough, and available enough, a small bird like the pigeon had a problem. Not a biological problem, an economic one. Why maintain a dovecote and process little squabs when an industrial supply chain can deliver chicken breasts by the truckload? Pigeons gradually became unnecessary as mainstream food in many places. But the pigeons did not disappear, because pigeons had already spent thousands of years becoming extremely good at living next to us. Then humans built cities that accidentally resembled the cliffs their ancestors preferred. Concrete ledges became nesting sites. Building facades became rock faces. Bridges became caves. Food scraps replaced scattered grain. And the urban pigeon found itself in one of the greatest artificial habitats ever constructed for an animal nobody intended to house. We stopped feeding pigeons on purpose. Then we built an ecosystem that fed them by accident. That is the moment the relationship flips. When an animal is useful and lives near you, it is livestock. When it stops being useful but continues living near you, it becomes a nuisance. And once a nuisance becomes common enough, the language changes. Dirty, diseased, infested, vermin, pest. But there is an obvious problem with the idea that pigeons are simply disgusting animals. A huge portion of humanity never received that memo. Pigeon and squab remain part of cuisines in multiple regions around the world. In Egypt, stuffed pigeon is a recognizable traditional dish. In parts of Chinese cuisine, roasted or braised pigeon can appear as a specialty food. French culinary traditions never completely abandoned squab. Pigeon also appears in North African and Middle Eastern cooking. The precise recipes differ. The cultural meaning differs, but the biological animal is not performing some magical transformation at the border. A pigeon does not fly from one country to another and become cleaner. People change the category, and sometimes all it takes is a restaurant door. Imagine two birds. Bird number one is standing beside a trash can outside a train station. It has one damaged tail feather. It is pecking at something you hope is bread. Someone says, "Would you eat that pigeon?" Absolutely not. Bird number two is raised on a farm under controlled conditions, processed as food, cooked by a chef, placed on a white plate with a sauce you cannot pronounce, and listed on the menu as roasted squab. Now it costs $40. Suddenly, nobody at the table is screaming about rats with wings. The animal did not change categories biologically. It changed categories psychologically. And disgust is extremely sensitive to categories. Human beings do not evaluate food like laboratory equipment. We evaluate it through associations. If something becomes mentally linked with garbage, feces, disease, or decay, the disgust system reacts before careful reasoning gets much of a vote. That reaction is useful. For most of human history, avoiding contaminated food could save your life. The problem is that the system is not especially interested in nuance. It does not naturally separate every member of a species into neat epidemiological subcategories. Farm-raised pigeon intended for human consumption, city pigeon standing inside a dumpster, same silhouette, same word, same mental folder. And the folder is labeled disgusting. This is why telling somebody, technically, properly raised pigeon is edible, often accomplishes nothing. Technically is not where disgust lives. But economics explains another part of the story. Food taboos are easier to develop when you no longer need the food. If pigeon had remained one of the cheapest, easiest, most reliable sources of meat in major American cities, our cultural relationship with it might look very different. Instead, chicken won. Chicken became so normal that Americans eat it constantly without thinking about the animal itself. Chicken is nuggets, chicken is wings, chicken is sandwiches, chicken is salad protein, chicken is dinner when nobody has another idea. And industrial food systems became very good at separating the animal from the eating experience. A chicken breast does not look like a chicken. A nugget barely looks biological. By contrast, pigeon remained visible. It stands beside you while you eat lunch. It watches you. It steals your bread. It leaves evidence on your windshield. Chicken disappeared behind packaging. Pigeon stayed on the sidewalk. That difference matters more than it seems. Because modern consumers often tolerate animals as food most easily when the animal itself becomes abstract. There is another little linguistic trick happening here. We do not always call the animal and the food the same thing. Cow becomes beef. Pig becomes pork. Young pigeon becomes squab. Language creates distance. Put pigeon on a menu, and some people imagine a train station. Put squab on the menu, and the exact same person may imagine French cuisine. That is not nutrition. That is branding operating on top of culture. And once you notice this, the pigeon story stops being about pigeons. Consider rabbits. In one household, a rabbit has a name, lives indoors, and gets birthday photos. In another culture or another kitchen, rabbit is dinner. Consider horses. In the United States, horse meat triggers strong emotional resistance in many people because horses occupy categories like companion, athlete, and symbol. Elsewhere, horse meat has been consumed without the same cultural reaction. Dogs make the point even more sharply. For millions of people, the idea of eating a dog is horrifying in a way that eating a pig is not. But pigs are intelligent, social mammals too. The emotional difference is not produced by a simple biological measurement of intelligence. It is produced by relationship and category. Then there is the lobster, an animal that resembles something designed by a nightmare, walks around inside an external skeleton, scavenges on the seafloor, and yet can arrive at the table as luxury. Put enough butter beside an arthropod, and apparently everything changes. Guinea pigs can be pets. They can also be traditional food. Frogs can be pond animals or cuisine. Goats can be livestock, pets, sacrifice animals, symbols, or invasive pests depending on where you stand. Human beings do not eat species. We eat categories: food, pet, pest, sacred, wildlife, luxury, disgusting, normal. And those categories feel permanent precisely because most of us inherit them before we are old enough to remember learning them. You were probably not given a spreadsheet as a child explaining which animals belonged in which category. Nobody sat you down at age 4 and said, "Today we will establish the moral ontology of livestock." You watched adults. You saw what appeared on plates. You learned which animals got names. You learned which animals got swatted. You learned which animals lived in cartoons. You learned which animals lived in refrigerators. And eventually the categories stopped feeling learned. They started feeling obvious. That is the trick. Culture is most powerful when it stops looking like culture. Now go back to the pigeon at the beginning. The ridiculous little bird fighting over a French fry. It has no idea what category it is in. It does not know humans once constructed buildings specifically for its ancestors. It does not know pigeon meat appeared on tables for generations. It does not know other pigeons carried military messages. It does not know the dove became one of the most recognizable symbols of peace in human culture. It does not know that somewhere else, a bird nearly identical to it may currently be sitting on a restaurant plate. It just knows there is half a French fry on the ground. And maybe that is what makes the pigeon such a perfect animal for this question, because almost nothing about the bird itself had to change. We domesticated it, we ate it, we used it, we celebrated it, we abandoned it. Then we insulted it for refusing to leave. The pigeon did exactly what domestication taught it to do: stay close to humans. And after thousands of years of rewarding that behavior, we changed the rules. Now its presence feels unnatural. Food norms work the same way. Every generation tends to assume that the animals on its plate belong there, and the animals outside that category obviously do not. But history keeps showing us that obvious can have a surprisingly short expiration date. An animal can move from food to pest, from poverty food to luxury, from livestock to companion, from disgusting to fashionable, sometimes within only a few generations. So the next time a fat pigeon waddles across the sidewalk in front of you, you do not have to look at it and think dinner. That is not the point. The point is that one of the animals modern city dwellers are most comfortable mocking was once useful enough that humans spent centuries building an entire relationship around it. The bird barely changed. The economic system changed. The city changed. The food supply changed. The language changed. And eventually your reaction changed, which raises a much stranger question than whether people should eat pigeons. If a culture can take an animal that was food for thousands of years and turn it into vermin, how many animals we consider completely normal to eat today are only normal because we were born into the right century?